On the night of March 24, 1944, a man pushed open a wooden trapdoor and slowly raised his head above the frozen ground. For months, he and hundreds of other Allied prisoners had dreamed of this moment. Behind him stretched a narrow tunnel more than 100 meters long. Behind that tunnel, inside a wooden barracks, nearly 200 men waited in silence. The plan said the exit would open beneath the trees. But when the first prisoner looked outside, he saw something terrifying. The forest was still 10 feet away. Between the tunnel and the trees was an exposed strip of snow. Beyond it stood a German guard tower. Its searchlight moved slowly across the darkness. What should they do? Close the tunnel and abandon 15 months of work? Or crawl into the open, one man at a time, knowing that a single guard could discover them? There was another problem. The prisoners had planned for one man to escape every minute. But now they could only move when the guard looked away. A rope was stretched from the tunnel exit back to the men underground. When it was safe, the rope moved. Another prisoner emerged, crossed the snow, and disappeared into the trees. One man escaped. Then another. Then another. By the time the guards discovered the tunnel, 76 prisoners had reached the outside world. But where had this tunnel come from? How had hundreds of prisoners constructed an underground railway, ventilation system, and secret factory directly beneath one of Germany's most closely guarded prisoner-of-war camps? And why would they attempt an escape when most of them knew they would probably be captured again? To understand that, we must return to the barracks, and to a plan hidden beneath the floor. Stalag Luft 3 stood near the town of Sagan, in what was then Nazi Germany, and is now Zagan, Poland. It was operated by the German Luftwaffe and used to hold captured Allied airmen. The location had not been chosen by accident. The ground was made largely of loose, pale sand. Digging through it was difficult because the walls could collapse without warning. Worse, the sand beneath the surface was a different color from the soil above it. Even a small amount dropped near the barracks could reveal that someone was digging. The prisoners were surrounded by fences, patrols, and guard towers. Searches could happen without warning. Guards watched for missing furniture, unusual movement, and tiny changes in the ground. The camp was built to answer one question: how do you stop trained military officers from escaping? The prisoners answered with another question: how do you stop men from trying? For captured airmen, escape was not simply an adventure. If a prisoner reached Allied territory, he might return to duty. Even an unsuccessful escape forced Germany to use police, soldiers, and transportation to search for the missing men. But there was also a psychological reason. Captivity reduced a pilot's world to roll calls, fences, and waiting. Escape planning gave that world a purpose. A man who spent the morning forging a travel permit, or measuring the distance to the forest, was no longer simply waiting for the war to end. He was taking part in it again. That did not mean every man could dig whenever he wanted. Random attempts endangered everyone. The prisoners needed organization, secrecy, and someone willing to control the entire operation. That man was squadron leader Roger Bushell. Inside the camp, he was known by a different name: Big X. Roger Bushell was a captured Royal Air Force officer, a trained lawyer, and an experienced escape planner. He had already escaped from captivity before being caught again. By 1943, he understood the central weakness of small escape attempts. A tunnel for 5 men might free 5 men. But it would not seriously disrupt the German system. Bushell wanted something larger. He proposed that the prisoners build 3 tunnels at the same time and prepare as many as 200 men to escape during a single night. Why 3 tunnels? Because if the guards discovered one, they might believe they had destroyed the entire plan. Meanwhile, 2 more could remain hidden. The tunnels were given ordinary names: Tom, Dick, and Harry. Even their names were part of the security system. men were not supposed to openly say they were working on the tunnel. They spoke about Tom, Dick, or Harry as though they were people. But Bushell's plan required far more than diggers. Who would create civilian clothing so escaped officers did not look like prisoners? Who would forge identification papers? Who would draw maps, collect railway schedules, manufacture compasses, and decide which languages each man could speak? And what about security inside the camp? German guards sometimes entered the compound unexpectedly. The prisoners created teams of lookouts known as stooges. A stooge might appear to be reading, playing a game, or walking casually between barracks. In reality, he was watching the guards. If danger approached, a warning could travel through the camp before the search reached the tunnel entrance. More than 600 men eventually became involved in the planning and construction. Most of them would never receive a place in the tunnel. They worked anyway. Why help build an escape route you might never use? Because the operation did not belong to one prisoner. It was a collective act of resistance. Every forged stamp, hidden plank, and handful of scattered sand became part of the same refusal. The fences might control where they lived, but they would not control what they attempted. The first challenge was hiding the entrances. A trapdoor could not simply be placed beneath a bed. Guards knew where to search. The entrance needed to disappear so completely that a man could stand directly above it without knowing it was there. Tom began inside Hut 123. Dick started in Hut 122. Harry was hidden beneath a stove in Hut 104. Once underground, the prisoners dug downward before moving toward the perimeter. The tunnels descended to a depth of roughly 30 feet. Why go so deep? Because the deeper they went, the less likely the guards were to detect vibrations or discover the tunnels during ordinary searches. But depth created new dangers. The air became hot and stale. The space was only about 2 feet wide and 2 feet high. A man working at the face could not stand, turn around, or quickly escape. He had to lie on his stomach, dig into the sand, and push the soil backward. If the ceiling collapsed, 30 feet of earth separated him from the surface. The prisoners needed wood to support the walls. But there was no lumberyard inside the camp. So the wood began disappearing from the barracks. Boards vanished from beneath mattresses. Pieces were taken from furniture. Beds that had once been supported by many wooden slats were gradually left with only a few. The prisoners also needed tools. They transformed knives, spoons, and forks into digging instruments. Thousands of everyday objects were repurposed during the operation, while roughly 4,000 bed boards were used to reinforce the tunnel walls. But a reinforced tunnel was useless if the men inside could not breathe. The prisoners connected hundreds of empty powdered milk tins to create ventilation pipes. Homemade pumps pushed fresh air toward the diggers. Electric wiring provided lights. Small underground chambers served as workshops and rest points. They even constructed a basic trolley system so containers of sand and workers could move through the tunnel more efficiently. Think about what they had built. 30 feet below a German prisoner of war camp, men using food tins and pieces of furniture had created a miniature underground engineering network. And every part of it had to remain invisible. Digging the tunnels created an obvious question. What do you do with all the sand? They could not leave it underground. The tunnel would quickly become blocked. But they could not pile it behind a barracks either. The pale underground sand would be visible against the darker surface soil. The prisoners developed several methods. Some filled long cloth bags concealed inside their trousers. A cord controlled an opening near the ankle. As the prisoner walked across the camp, he released a thin stream of sand and spread it with his feet. These men developed an unusual walk because of the sand hidden beneath their clothing. They became known as penguins. Others mixed the sand into small gardens or hid it beneath buildings. Later, Dick, one of the 3 tunnels, became a storage space for excavated soil and escape equipment. But how much sand can hundreds of men scatter before someone notices? That was the constant danger. The larger the tunnels became, the harder the evidence was to hide. Then disaster came. In September 1943, the Germans discovered Tom. The tunnel was destroyed. Imagine what that moment must have felt like. Months of work were gone. Guards now knew that a major project had existed. Searches would become more intense. Every prisoner associated with the operation faced greater danger. Was it time to stop? That was exactly why Bushell had ordered 3 tunnels. Dick could no longer be used as planned because construction inside the camp changed the area where its exit would emerge. But its hidden entrance remained useful for storing supplies. Harry survived. Work paused for a time, then resumed in January 1944. From that point forward, everything depended on one tunnel beneath Hut 104. There would be no fourth chance. Escaping from the camp was only the first part of the problem. What happens after a prisoner reaches the forest? He is still inside Nazi-controlled Europe. He may be hundreds of miles from neutral territory. He may not speak German. He has no legal identity, no ordinary clothing, and almost no money. A man crawling through the tunnel in a prison uniform could be arrested within minutes. So the barracks became a factory. Tailors altered military uniforms to resemble civilian clothing. Forgers reproduced identification papers, travel permits, and official stamps. Mapmakers created routes toward railway stations, borders, and ports. Playing cards were used to conceal maps. Pieces of gramophone records and magnetized razor blades were turned into small compasses. The prisoners studied the identities they would use outside the camp. A forged document was not enough. A man had to know who he was supposed to be, where he was traveling, and how to answer questions without hesitating. Some men could pass as foreign laborers. Others planned to pose as businessmen or factory workers. But could a tired prisoner truly convince a railway official that he belonged outside? That depended on preparation. The escape committee ranked the candidates. Men with strong language skills, realistic disguises, and good knowledge of Europe received priority. Others would travel mainly at night and avoid public transportation. Approximately 200 men were selected to enter Harry on the night of the escape. The first group had the best papers and the strongest chance of traveling long distances. Those farther back might receive only simple clothing, food, and directions. For 15 months, the prisoners had prepared for this moment. Yet the more complete the plan became, the more fragile it seemed. One suspicious guard could destroy it. One broken trapdoor could delay it. One incorrect measurement could expose the entire escape. And beneath the barracks, Harry was approaching the forest. The escape began on the night of March 24, 1944. The men gathered inside Hut 104 carrying forged documents, civilian clothing, and small packages of food. They had been assigned numbers that determined the order in which they would enter the tunnel. Outside, the ground was cold and covered with snow. The opening beneath the stove was uncovered. One by one, the first men descended into Harry. Almost immediately, there were problems. The trapdoor had become difficult to open. The tunnel was narrow, slowing movement. Men carrying bags had trouble squeezing through. Then the first prisoner reached the far end and discovered the worst problem of all. Harry had been measured incorrectly. Instead of emerging safely beneath the trees, the exit stopped 10 feet short of the forest. Anyone climbing out could be seen from a nearby guard tower. Why was a difference of 10 feet so important? Because the original plan depended on speed. Hundreds of men could leave only if the line moved continuously. Now each prisoner had to wait until the searchlight and guards were facing away. A signal rope was improvised. A lookout near the trees watched the guard movements and signaled the men below. The escape continued, but far more slowly than planned. Inside Hut 104, men waited without knowing what was happening ahead of them. Minutes passed. The line barely moved. Every delay reduced the number who could escape before morning. Still, prisoners emerged from the tunnel and crossed the exposed snow. Some reached railway stations and boarded trains using forged documents. Others began walking through the darkness. For a brief moment, the impossible plan was working. Then a German guard noticed movement near the trees. The alarm was raised. Prisoners still waiting in Hut 104 began destroying the evidence they carried. Forged documents and maps were thrown into stoves. Food prepared for the journey was eaten before guards could find it. The tunnel had been exposed. Of the 200 men waiting to escape, 76 had made it beyond the camp. By morning, German authorities had launched an enormous search. Checkpoints appeared on roads and railway lines. Police inspected stations, hotels, and border routes. Escaped prisoners moved through a country already prepared to examine documents and question unfamiliar travelers. Some were discovered within hours. Others remained free for days. But only 3 reached safety: Norwegian airman Per Bergsland and Jens Muller, and Dutch pilot Bram van der Stok. The remaining 73 were recaptured. Under the laws of war, escaped prisoners who were caught would normally be returned to captivity. But Hitler ordered that 50 of the recaptured men be killed. The victims included Roger Bushel, the man who had organized the plan. German authorities falsely claimed that the prisoners had been shot while trying to escape again. In reality, they were taken away in small groups and murdered. So was the Great Escape a failure? If success is measured only by the number of men who returned home, the result was devastating. 3 reached safety. 50 never returned to the camp. But that answer is not complete. For 15 months, hundreds of prisoners built a hidden organization beneath the control of their captors. They turned beds into tunnel supports, milk tins into air ducts, and playing cards into maps. They forced the German state to divert personnel and resources into one of the largest searches of the war. Most importantly, they proved that captivity had not taken away their ability to organize, resist, and choose their own purpose. The escape did not end when the tunnel was discovered. After the war, investigators searched for the people responsible for the killings. Dozens of participants in the murders were identified, and a number were eventually tried and sentenced. Today, the Great Escape is often remembered as an adventure: secret maps, forged documents, and a tunnel stretching beneath a prison camp. But beneath that image lies a more difficult story. The men of Stalag Luft 3 were not digging because they believed every prisoner would reach freedom. Most understood how small their chances were. They dug because doing nothing meant accepting the world defenses had created for them. And so, beneath the barracks, they built another world. It had electric lights made from stolen wire, air ducts made from food tins, railway tracks assembled from scraps. It had engineers, tailors, mapmakers, lookouts, and forgers. Above them stood guard towers, fences, and armed patrols. Below them existed an escape plan so carefully organized that more than 600 men could work on it without the guards understanding its full scale. The tunnel ended 10 feet too soon. Most of the escapees were captured. 50 were murdered. Yet decades later, we still remember the men who crawled through Harry. Why? Perhaps because the real mystery is not how they constructed a tunnel beneath the barracks. The real mystery is how men surrounded by fences continued to believe that freedom was worth building, even when they might never live to reach it.